movimento revolucionário chega ao poder e se contamina. Vanguarda na luta contra o racismo institucionalizado do apartheid na África do Sul, o Congresso Nacional Africano, CNA, derrotou o regime que só privilegiava gente branca e impôs a libertação de seu líder, Nelson Mandela, eleito então o primeiro presidente da nova África do Sul, multirracial. Mas quando o democrático e honesto Mandela se aposentou, seus sucessores não foram dignos da herança. Esta é a tese do sul-africano Andrew Feinstein, ele mesmo ex-deputado do CNA, organização onde militou contra o apartheid, que beneficiava sua raça, mas ofendia seus valores. No parlamento, ele descobriu e denunciou corrupção no partido, envolvendo compra de aviões militares, como o Brasil faz agora. Foi pressionado a renunciar e acabou deixando o país. Feinstein acusa o sucessor de Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, não só de corrupção, mas também de negligência criminosa diante da mega epidemia de AIDS que ainda assola milhões na África do Sul e já matou muita gente por falta de tratamento correto. A recente eleição de Jacob Zuma para a presidência dá pouca esperança a Feinstein de melhorias para este país de 50 milhões de habitantes, maior economia da África. O livro dele, After the Party, tem duplo significado. Pode ser interpretado como depois do partido ou depois da festa, referência à vitória contra o racismo, mas início dos desvios do CNA.
In a recent discussion about South Africa here in London, with your participation, in an attempt to explain the new president, Jacob Zuma, it was brought up that he could turn out to be like President Lula, a man who came from the left, a politician from the left that turned out to be a moderate in government. Or he could be like Silvio Berlusconi, a populist, big mouth, funny, and under a lot of suspicion of corruption. So you have just come back from South Africa. So how is Zuma turning out to be, like Lula or like Berlusconi?
It's too early to give a definitive answer, but the one thing that is quite clear is the other aspect of the sort of Lula analogy is their backgrounds. Zuma comes from very humble origins. He was a goat herder as a young boy, and that has enabled him to position himself as the people's person, the people's leader, in a way that Thabo Mbeki never was. Thabo Mbeki was seen as a technocrat, very distant. Zuma seems very approachable. He has an ability to connect with ordinary people that I think is quite similar to Lula. In terms of the Berlusconi analogy, he comes with enormous baggage. He was on trial for rape, of which he was found not guilty, in some ways mirroring some of Berlusconi's very recent problems. But similarly, there has been a huge cloud hanging over him around personal corruption for many years, and he has put pressure on judicial institutions and the institutions of state to get himself off the hook. And that again reminds me a great deal of the way Berlusconi has used his time in power to, in a sense, absolve himself of any legal difficulties he's had historically. My instinct is that Zuma is going to land up being something of a mix of the two. He will be a popular leader of the people. He will, in general terms, he will be more moderate than his rhetoric has suggested up to now, but the personal issues are not going to go away.
So we're going to get a Lulasconi.
Lulasconi, absolutely.
He's also a very charming man, very popular, different from Mbeki, as you mentioned. And he has lots of style, song and dance. Yeah. But besides style, does he have any substance?
Very difficult to answer. I worked with the man in the early years after democracy when he was a provincial minister of economic affairs, and he had a great ability to say to interest groups exactly what they wanted to hear. So he would tell the business community exactly what they wanted to hear, and a few days later would tell the trade union movement exactly what they wanted to hear, and there wasn't a lot of commonality between what he was telling them. Then it didn't matter because he had no power in that position. Now, of course, he has a huge amount of power, and he is something of a policy blank slate. Nobody knows what this man really believes in, ideologically or in policy terms. So there doesn't seem to be a great deal of engagement with key policy issues confronting South Africa. He's almost more of a sort of a conciliator, getting people around him who will try and sort out these issues.
Your book deals quite a bit with corruption. Do you think this is a kind of a cloud that will remain hovering over the government of Zuma until things are clarified?
There is no doubt. You know, starting with a massive arms deal.
Please explain that to us. Summarize for our readers, which is an important part of your book,
Yes.
Because there are parallels.
Yeah.
It's an enormous corruption scandal that involves buying airplanes
Yeah.
for the Air Force
Yeah.
in South Africa. Brazil was about to buy airplanes. So
Yeah.
summarize for us what that...
In the South African case, 4 years after the advent of democracy, so we're talking 1998, the government decided to spend $5 billion on primarily jet fighters, some trainer jets, also some corvettes, some helicopters. But this was at a time that Thabo Mbeki was saying the government couldn't afford to provide the antiretroviral medication that the over 5 million South Africans living with AIDS desperately needed to stay alive. So it was an inordinate amount of money for this new democratic government faced with all sorts of socio-economic challenges. In the investigation, I tried to investigate it in Parliament and was stopped by Mbeki from investigating it. There was a very watered-down investigation that found nothing in particular and never really looked at the real allegations of corruption.
It's important to mention to our viewers that at that moment, you were a member of Parliament with the committee that was involved in the Public Accounts.
Correct. I was the senior ANC member on the Public Accounts Committee, the committee that looks at all government spending. A report came to us from our Auditor General saying that there were serious problems in this arms deal. This was now 3 years after the deal had been signed. And Mbeki said to me, quite explicitly, we don't deal with this matter publicly in Parliament, we deal with it privately within the party. The problem was, Mbeki was the person who chaired the Ministers' Committee that made all of the decisions. And some of these decisions were an absolute nonsense. So, for instance, to give you some flavor of it, we bought jet fighters and trainer jets from Saab and British Aerospace. The Air Force said explicitly they would only take these jets if the politicians forced them to.
They didn't want them.
They didn't want them. They didn't make the shortlist that the Air Force had put together because it didn't meet their technical specifications. It was 2.5 times more expensive than the jets that they actually wanted, which was an Italian jet very similar to the jets that the Air Force had flown previously. And the then Defense Minister, Joe Modise, and Mbeki simply overruled all of that. And the decision was taken to go with BAE Saab. Now, the reason for that was that BAE paid £116 million in bribes on that one contract alone.